Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's a favorite around here. And believe it or not, before I came to University Methodist, I had never seen this musical. But boy, did I love it. The music is so catchy that if I could carry a tune, I might just sing one of the songs for you right now, but I'll spare you. But I can still see Zach Sandoval standing right here with that fabulous coat that Randa Patrick made, and all the youth are gathered around holding up the edges of it so that he's framed perfectly in a rainbow of colors. It was an amazing show. And so Joseph, after receiving that long-sleeved coat of many colors, after being sold into slavery at the hand of his brothers, after ending up in Egypt, being jailed, rising to one of the highest ranks in Egyptian leadership, that Joseph saved up storehouses upon storehouses of food that saved Egypt in their time of famine. But that was centuries ago, centuries before the setting of today's scripture. And there's a new Pharaoh now, one who didn't remember Joseph, one who feared the Israelites because of their strength and their sheer numbers. Now, at first, this Pharaoh tried to break the Hebrews with brutally hard work. But the more the government oppressed them, the more they were crushed by slave labor, the more children they had. And so Pharaoh resorted to murder. And that's where our scripture picks up today. Because Pharaoh's punishment of hard labor doesn't decrease the Hebrews' desire to have children, Pharaoh turns to the midwives. His response is to have these trusted people who come alongside women in one of their most intimate and vulnerable times of their life. And then he orders these midwives to betray the Hebrew women, to control their bodies, to manipulate them. He orders the midwives to quietly smother any boys born to the Hebrew women and tell the mothers that they were stillborn. And so what do the midwives do? They resist. Instead of placing their hand over the mouth of the child until they find out the sex of the baby, they cup their hands to support the child. The midwives resist. They resist the government. They resist the ethnic divisions in their society. They resist the patriarchy. They use their cunning, and they tell the king, the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before we can get there, they've already had the baby. And what I love about this description of the Hebrews as vigorous is that it can actually translate to they are full of life. And in fact, they are. Life is literally spilling from them with the assistance of these midwives. What a powerful and telling statement. Oh, Pharaoh, watch out. The Hebrews are full of life. And the interesting thing about Pharaoh is that he and the Egyptians, they don't examine their fear about the growing number of Hebrew people. They never asked themselves why the Hebrews might be angry enough to revolt. Instead, Pharaoh only asks how the Hebrews could be controlled so that they would be too demoralized to rebel. Sometimes we tell ourselves that the status quo isn't so flawed, that people like Pharaoh don't exist anymore, that we aren't surrounded by people who want to control women's bodies for their own purposes, or people who abuse and violate the ones that they love the most. But what the midwives tell us is to wake up, is to push back, is to open our eyes to what's going on around us. Domestic violence, sexual assault, harassment, they're among the most destructive forces imaginable. And depending on your own life experiences, you may or may not have been shocked over the past few months as the Me Too movement has gained ground to discover just how prevalent domestic violence and sexual violence are. The numbers are staggering. Statistics show that 1 in 6 women in our country have been raped. The Center for Disease Control's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey states that more than 1 in 3 women have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. That's 1 in 3 who've experienced someone trying to take control of their body. And for men, the stats aren't much better. 1 in 4 men will experience the same thing. I can't imagine what hearing that information must feel like for a parent. 1 in 4 men, 1 in 3 women. For me, it's hard to wrap my head around numbers like that, especially since the majority of victims and survivors don't report their assaults. And so I'll say it like this. In the 10 years that followed the September 11th attacks, approximately 9,500 innocent victims and military service members lost their lives from the day of the attack to the resulting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in those same 10 years, 12,000 American women were killed by intimate partners, by husbands, by boyfriends, and domestic violence-related incidents. That is 2,000 more women killed by their partners than people killed in the war. And it's not that these two categories of people are related in any way, but is this comparison that helped me to better grasp the reality of this gender-based violence epidemic. So it's obvious that from the midwives and Pharaoh to now that we have a problem, that we have a history of trying to control people's bodies and women's access to the public sphere. From the rape of Tamar, the daughter of King David, by her half-brother, to Lot offering up his virgin daughters to a mob of men, to Joseph's sexual harassment at the hands of Potiphar's wife, to the Levite's concubine who was assaulted and left for dead. It is these difficult scriptures that give us permission, that give us authority to address these challenging topics. It is part of our biblical tradition to be concerned for those who are affected by domestic violence and sexual assault. There is hope because our scriptures include these stories. Our scriptures take these stories seriously. And there are countless other stories in scriptures, like today's reading, that call us to respond, to stand up, to push back against the realities of this world and the oppression that is present. Which takes us to Moses' mom, to his sister Miriam, and to Pharaoh's daughter. Not only do they resist, not only do they save the life of the person whom God calls to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and across the Red Sea, through the wilderness and into the promised land, but they also remind us of the power of speaking out. As Pharaoh's daughter, as the princess is bathing in the Nile, she looks up the river just a bit and spots something and looks back at her attendants. This must be one of the Hebrew children. And her words must have so much behind them because she is bathing in that river where those baby boys were drowned. The trauma, the horror. But this baby boy, this boy is alive, and this one woman, this princess, speaks. And her truth calls forth another and invites another person to speak up as well. one person, pausing over unspeakable evil, encourages another to stand with her. The princess's voice opens a space for others to speak. It empowers. And so Miriam steps out from behind the reeds and addresses royalty. Do you want me to find someone to nurse the child for you? Miriam never would have spoken if the princess hadn't first. And ultimately, it is Miriam's words that save Moses. When we speak, we never know who might be listening. We never know who might be waiting for a reason to come out from their hiding space to stand with you. When we speak, we empower others to enter into the conversation, to cast off their shame, to walk with another, to speak their own truth. And so what if people spoke up? What if people spoke out? What if everyone heard? Would that change anything? What if conversation arose? And so I invite you into conversation this week to participate in a dialogue about gender-based violence. We'll gather this Wednesday here in the church library at 6 p.m. on April 11th. And you can pick up a packet in the back of the narthex. I'll also have them on Wednesday, as we'll be using this to guide our conversation. It has more information about gender-based violence. And this time of conversation, it's intended to help people reflect on sexual and domestic violence, to share their personal opinions and perhaps ways that we might respond. This is a place for people of all backgrounds and ways of thinking. You are welcome to this conversation, whether you find yourself as Pharaoh's daughter or as Miriam, whether you find yourself among the Hebrew women attacked but surviving, or among the midwives resisting the culture that says certain people are pawns for others' disposal. You are welcome even if you find yourself among the pharaohs of this world, or somewhere in between. Because ultimately, it does not go well for Egypt. 2 words: Red Sea. Pharaoh uses all the power at his disposal, which is like all the power in the world. But still the Hebrew boy is born. But still this child survives. Despite all that power, Moses still leads God's people. They are liberated because God sees and God knows and God responds and God calls us to respond. God has not forgotten the abused. Resistance to oppression, it begins with small steps. The enslaved Hebrews didn't have the power to just defeat Pharaoh and topple the patriarchal system of oppression, but the midwives can save children. And Moses' mom and Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter can save Moses. In the face of slavery, in the face of patriarchy, it's easy to be intimidated by systems that are so large and so well-rooted. And those systems leave people demoralized and disempowered until we believe we are powerless. That is until one person challenges the system. That is until the midwives allow the boys to live. That is until Moses' mom refuses to have her baby drowned. That is until Miriam approaches the princess, until Pharaoh's daughter defies her father's decree. That is until we decide to speak and push back. Until we decide that we all need to leave Egypt. Amen.